Is this not a common problem with many states here when we talk about proximity to power, or in fact being in power, that it does somewhat change what you once stood for, or really the perspective changes? You've got access now. So sometimes, like you say, they might now fall into the category of former activists or comrades because they no longer feel there's an agenda to be fighting for or a cause to be fighting for.
Yes, I know that this is the common problem amongst political parties, that their goal in life becoming how to stay in power and how to enrich themselves, their friends, in a very crony capitalistic way. But we intended in 1994 to be different. We had studied revolutions around the world in which liberation movements have eaten their children, and we vowed to be different. And this does not stop us as 60 million South Africans standing up and condemning the type of blatant corruption, the brazen gaslighting of people that want to keep us committed and faithful to the dream of 1994, that our goal in serving in politics or in private business or in civil society was the quest for a better life for our people. And nowhere in South Africa do I see the delivery of that dream. And today it is up to us. Just like our freedom was never won by these leaders, including myself, it was won when the South African population stood up and said we had enough of people oppressing us, exploiting us, using us to enrich themselves. So I am just reiterating a message that we gave to society in generations of the past, fighting for the freedom of our people based on the Freedom Charter. Nothing in what I see this government doing represents even an iota of what we fought for and stood for in the Freedom Charter.
Mm-hmm. Now, in that very article,
all I see is the ceremony and the pomp of politics. I see no content to that politics. It does not matter to me what parade of fancy dresses and clothing they wear into Parliament. Our goal of going to Parliament wasn't to be in a fashion parade. It wasn't to have the rituals and the ceremony of the armed forces in the streets. It was about service to our society, something they seem to have forgotten.
Mm-hmm. Now, talk to me. In that article, you actually went on to say that the fearful environment that you fought, which ridiculed and somewhat demonized you or activists, is now being reenacted. You mentioned Minister Mantashe and as one of those who demonize activism, and many would remember that just last week in that SONA address, he somewhat demonized activists here because he went on to caution against their litigious inclination in most cases now, saying that you're scaring away investors, and these are the green activists, those that want to see those that are actually advocating for the environment. He was one that said we've got to actually discourage that type of behavior, saying that you would have angels that are then dying of hunger. What did you make of that?
It's an atrocious lie. How can you accuse the community of protecting their lands and their pristine, biodiverse areas that they have a spiritual and cultural heritage in, of causing unemployment? It is not the people in those communities that control policy, that control the levers of power. And if I listen to the accusations of Gwede Mantashe, I ask myself, how can someone want to stop funding of civil society, accuse civil society, activists of damaging our economy, when in fact the Zondo Commission on State Capture clearly illustrates that those that are in power have been the ones that have plundered our country and reduced it to a ghost of its former self. So I don't understand how someone like that can use the language used by the apartheid regime to discredit activism. And of course, people will go to the court in a context where people in power abuse power. What options do we have to mobilize and organize our communities, to use the judiciary to protect our constitutional rights, and also a small independent media that is expose the corruption It was not exposed by government, the corruption in its ranks. It was exposed by whistleblowers. It was exposed by community activists. If I look at the fight for textbooks in schools, or the right of people to ARVs, or the action against corruption that has made this a major issue facing us in South Africa, it's not government that has led that. It's been civil society that's led that. And I am there standing alongside civil society, and I think it's time we drew a line in the rock to accuse those people who are in power, that are abusing their power and pursuing an agenda that is not in accordance with the Constitution or the dreams that we had of freedom in 1994.
But the difficulty with this whole debate around the Minister Mantashe, is that we've had the president in certain instances coming to his defense to say he is a through and through labor man. He is a unionist at heart and a miner at heart. That's why when it comes to the issue around coal mining and perhaps seeing an end or a just transition, that you'd hear him defending the fact that we have so much reserves of coal, and he is in fact defending labor. And then when we talk about the Shell incident, for one, if we're talking about exploration, he's somebody that says this would create the employment that we are crying for. So what happens there when, in most instances, we also have the president defending this position or explaining what is meant when you have the minister speaking in such a way?
Well, let's look at the science. The majority of scientists, the overwhelming majority of scientists say we should leave the coal in the ground. Our president went to Scotland and COP meeting there and secured an undertaking by the developed world to fund our transition away from coal. The coal mining industry employs 150,000 workers in associated employment. If we had to build a solar industry in the country, which is cheaper to do, more efficient, and allows us to stand by our international commitments to the Paris Climate Protocol, then we could create literally 250,000 jobs if one looks at what the people that understand the sector have modeled and what is the reality in many other countries around the world. So here we have a president that has secured a tremendous billions of dollars of investment to fund a just transition, and a minister that contradicts him and saying we will remain committed to the coal mining industry. I do not know of a single coal miner who says, I want my children to go kilometers under the ground in very dangerous conditions to go and dig coal. So yes, we need to address a transition.
But Cosatu speaks for them and says, but Cosatu speaks for them and agrees with the minister at times, Mr. Naidoo. Cosatu seems to be in agreement, though, where you would have the minister saying they're being strong-armed by big business. They're being strong-armed by developed nations here who themselves, for the longest time, would have built their economies on this coal and today want them to abruptly bring an end to it. And Cosatu, as a representative, a federation that represents these workers, is saying just transition it is, and activists are saying there is no such thing as just transition. You guys are hiding behind a fig leaf. There is inaction in this country. We're never transitioning.
Well, those are allegations, not proven by facts. Because if one looks at the role of Cosatu and its emergence and unions across the world, the general feeling is that there are no jobs on a dead planet. We are in a climate emergency. That's what the science is telling us. There are alternative ways of delivering clean energy. There are more job-creating capacity in that. And what we need, the government, is to look at the science and not argue on the basis of people's fears and paranoia. We have to base our decisions on science and what is reality. And the world has decided today that we should move away from fossil fuels. That is the reality. What are we talking about if we just talk about the rights of people in current employment without talking about the rights of those that are not born? And I think this is where we need to change the debate. There are alternative paradigms of economic development that deliver clean energy, that create more jobs, that deliver clean energy. And in spite of the big coal mining, the coal mining operations and the coal-fired power stations, tell me how many people in rural areas have access to clean energy or to energy at all. We could be talking about a whole new paradigm where local grids based on clean energy could be owned by communities, earning them revenues, delivering energy to them where they live. This is not about meeting the needs of people. This is about meeting needs of big business, meeting needs of the affluent, and ignoring the plight of the majority of people today who live in a context of energy scarcity and poverty.
What a powerful statement there when you say that there are no jobs in a dead planet. Thank you very much for just taking us through that piece of yours. That was Jay Naidoo, founding General Secretary of Cosatu and former Minister and former President Nelson Mandela.